Hello, I'm Kata Bikuk and welcome to the Walk the Valley, the podcast that breaks down barriers to bringing healthcare innovation to market. Today, I'm joined by Finn Ketler, a seasoned expert in healthcare innovation and commercialization. Startups are deeply focused on building their products, but often lack the right support when it comes to commercialization. Through his company CoopMed, Finn helps medtech and medical device startups accelerate the resource-heavy sales process, making sure that innovation designed to improve quality of life reach the people who actually need them. While funding is often the center of startup discussions, the valley of death is about much more than money. In this episode, we dive into major obstacles startups face, from building a strong team through stakeholder engagement strategies, and that you can only die once. If you're wondering how to bridge the gap between product and market in healthcare innovation, this episode is for you. Let's go for a walk in the valley. Finn, great to have you on the Walk the Valley podcast. Before we dive in, can you introduce yourself and share a bit about your background in healthcare innovation?
Yes, I have been in the medtech area for 30 years. I started as a sales director at Coloplast in the mid-90s and progressed from there also to go to the UK as a sales and marketing director. Came back to Denmark and became head of division for wound and skincare. After a while, the divisions were closed down and I was sent to Germany to run Coloplast GmbH. And after another many years, I left Coloplast in 2009, 2010, and asked myself, what do I really now want to do? Because I've spent all my time at the end of 2010 in big corporate companies like Lego, Arla, Danisco, Coloplast. So I decided to do something very different. And since then, I have supported startup companies within medtech. I have taken one company to a listing in Stockholm. And a couple of years ago, I established a company also to support startup companies, but on the commercial side, where most advisors and soft money is for R&D. And I think there's a big need to focus on the commercial side. During my journey, I also spent 2 years as a member of the selection committee at the Novo Nordisk BII, Bioinnovation Institute. And there I saw that the focus is definitely on R&D. I contacted most of the soft money funds you can find, Innovation Fund and all of them. And the feedback was generally that they support R&D. They support clinical evaluations and they de-risk at a very early stage. But they were not willing to support the commercial side.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, how come that you spend millions or billions on developing products without taking the commercial side into the picture from a very, very early stage? So that's why I chose to establish the company CoopMed, where we, as a cooperative company, support different or various startup companies to help them understand healthcare in Europe. Yeah, it's not difficult because you have 100,000 of nurses, you have doctors, you have 27 different countries in the EU. All of them have their own regulatory or at least reimbursement pathways, 23 different languages. So there's so much you need to cope with that if you don't get support in that area, it's very difficult because Denmark is really a small country. And if you base your strategies on a small country like Denmark, you will fail.
This is a very interesting point that you're saying. But before I will ask you to elaborate on this because it sounds very interesting. But I just want to say that it resonates with the aim of this podcast as well, that you're supporting on the commercialization side. And by the way, you mentioned the Innovation Fund Denmark, and I just had a meeting with a project partnership that wants to pursue that grant. And right now they say that they require someone who will then buy the product to be part of the consortium of the product development or the innovation development. And that kind of supports the idea of later commercialization. But then, if my understanding is correct, it also puts the public sector, if they are the ones who are the potential buyers in this consortium, in a position where they might be in a conflict of interest to adopt the solution they helped develop.
Yes and no. My point is that you need to engage in voice of customer very early, and therefore you need to have a dialogue with the purchase organizations, of course. But normally, when you mention voice of customer, you understand customer as the patient or the nurse. So hopefully you spend a lot of time with the nurses that will tell you how their daily work or how this innovative product can help them in their daily work. What you forget is that voice of the customer in my eyes is someone who is willing to pay for your product. In all cases, that is not the hospitals, it's a distributor. Because if you want to sell your product to all these European countries, you cannot do that on your own. One sales representative will cost you 1 million Danish kroner in salaries, travel, car. And just imagine that there are, or just realizing that there are hundreds, thousands of nurses, doctors, etc. You need to get your brilliant idea to, and you have one person doing that. It's not possible.
No, and typically pharmaceutical companies with a lot of income have sales teams doing that, right? But if you're coming from a startup position, it's really difficult to distribute the knowledge. So you need to develop strategies.
When I was heading the wound and skincare division at Coloplast, we had 400 salespeople or consultants or reps or whatever you call them. 400. That's the kind of number you need if you want to make a difference in the market. But you have one, and therefore you need to work with distributors who can multiply your one person to 10 in this country, to 20 in that country. If you work in the home care area, you need someone to go to every nursing home in a country. You would need hundreds or if not thousands of sales reps. And the only way to get to those numbers is by working with distributors. So I would almost say that in every talk I have with startups, they do not mention distributors at all. They mention their brilliant idea. They mention that the fact that they talk to patients, that they talk to nurses, mostly in Denmark. But they haven't considered, how will I take this brilliant idea to the world or to Europe? And that is a very important discussion to have.
Apart from this, what are the biggest mistakes you see startups making in their approach to commercialization?
It's their time perspective. Because if you have a time perspective that when I get the CE mark, I'm done, you will fail. Because
sometimes I hear, once I get the CE mark, I'll do that.
Yeah. But once you get the CE mark, you have another 5 years to go. Because it'll take you a year to introduce a product just to find a distributor, to get time in their busy calendar. and then they will go to the market and introduce it. It's always slow at the beginning. Maybe after 2-3 years it will start to pick up. So if you don't have time, let's say 5 years after your CE mark, your investors will not be happy. If you have communicated that once you have the CE mark, we will sell over the internet and it will go so fast, you will disappoint your investors. So it's much better to have the right time perspective from the beginning. Because if you have that, your communication with investors is much more trustworthy, better. If you communicate that once we have the CE mark, everything is beautiful, you have a big problem. And often if I see, well, I made a statistic from the CVR register, and 95% of all medtech companies, they don't make it. 95%. So it's 5% who will make it, and only 2% will make it to a level with more than 100 employees. Mm-hmm. I think during recent years, it has gone better. I don't know why, whether it's because of BII, because of all these initiatives to support companies, but it's getting better, but still not many that succeed. And some of the failures are not because the product is not good enough. It's because they don't have the time perspective that after the CE mark, it'll take us this number of years. Mm-hmm. And if the investors get disappointed, the funds dry out, and you will end in the valley of death.
Speaking of the valley of death,
do
you think there are many valleys of death? Or there's just one big valley of death with a lot of obstacles on the way?
Well, I think there's only one, because you can only die once. Therefore, it's important to know what kind of investors you're looking for at the beginning, in the middle, and at the later stages. Mm-hmm. So you'll normally start with fools, family and friends. Maybe someone like BII, some of the soft money, who are willing to take high risk. When you get that money, I see too many companies who are getting too comfortable, thinking, wow, now we have 2 million, 3 million, 4 million. And 4 million is nothing.
It gives you a runway of, depending on what your product is, about 1 or 2 years.
Yeah. Right. And 1 or 2 years is not much, which means that after 1 year, you will have to go looking for the next money. And after 1 year, you will have to show something more. You will have to show that now we are much closer to the CE mark. And you will have to show that you are able to deliver. Often, it's my impression that startup companies, they keep improving, developing, and they never end. So they can always find someone tweak here and there to improve their product. And then they are trying to make it perfect. But sometimes you don't need to have it perfect. You need to have everything you can to get it good enough. Mm-hmm. And then get to the market. Because what you learn the day you hit the market is so valuable. So if you instead think that you can develop a product to perfection and then launch it, or even much worse, go to a CMO, contract manufacturer, they will also find something in your perfect frozen product that they will want to change. And then when you reach the market, they will also tell you, you should have done. Mm-hmm. Which means if you try to do everything perfect, you will be so disappointed, because there are always someone along the line who will tell you it was not perfect. But maybe it was good enough to get to market and start talking to real customers. Mm. And they will learn you or tell you how the second version should be. And the second version is probably more likely to be the success you were aiming at.
Mm. So those 5% of founders who make it to the market, they employ successful strategies and lucky to have money as well.
Yes. If they succeed, they must have done something right. Well, you were asking me about the perfect strategy.
Yeah, is there a perfect strategy?
I don't think there's one, but I think a good starting point is to look at your product and ask yourself, is this a grand idea or is it a good idea? And the difference in my perspective is the grand idea has a potential to carry the cost of a company. The good idea is an add-on to something which is already in the market. But if you have a good product which is just an add-on to something in the market, you have already chosen the strategy that you want to sell it to the industry who can add it to their portfolio. It will never be good enough, it will never be grand enough to carry the cost of a company. And if you do that, you are in the area of strategies you can call hope.
Okay.
You hope, you hope that the industry will buy your product even before you have a CE mark, because your good idea is, you think, very good. But that will not happen. It will not happen, and I have spoken to all the international companies many times about projects like that, and the industry does not take risk. It's very important to understand. They do not take your risk. And the reason is very simple. When I was sitting at Coloplast, I had these 400 reps. But we also invested in manufacturing lines for our products. And therefore, the obvious thing to do is to ask your sales rep to sell the products you produce. Mm-hmm. If you start asking your own sales reps to focus on some innovative idea, which is not even ready yet, you dilute your market pressure, you can say. So they would also always say, our sales force will focus on what we can sell today, what we have today, what we can produce today. So if you hope that an industry player will come and take your product to the market, they will not. They will ask you to do it yourself. And when you are through the valley of death, when you have started to generate cash flow or cash, or when you have a turnover of, let's say, 10 million, 50 million, they will tell you, fantastic job you have done. If you can sell your product at 50 million Danish kroner per year, we can do it 10 times as good because we have the sales force. But we didn't take your risk. So again, if you have a good idea, as I call it, your strategy is likely to build on hope that the industry will come and save you and offer you a lot of money. And they will not. And then we are back to the grand idea, where you have an idea which has a potential of actually selling at 50 million level to generate the cash you need to carry a company. Mm-hmm. So I think the starting point in a good strategy discussion would be, do you have a good idea or do you have a grand idea?
Okay, so there are a few things there. One is to create a good enough product to put it on the market and test it and be okay with failing with it first, and then you can further develop. And the other one was a strategy to create trust in investors. Also, I'm thinking, in my experience, there are two parallel strategies that you as a founder need to sometimes decide which one to go through with. One is to develop, test, and get as much soft funding as you can, or try to, as soon as you get the CE mark, try to put it on the market and see how it works on the market. Do you think it's feasible to do these two parallel?
Yeah, it's also my experience that it's very important to understand what you are. Are you a medtech company, a biotech company, or a pharma company? Because the clinical documentation you have to deliver in the past at least, was very, very difficult or different. Now with the new MDR, it has become, or the difference has become less. So, and therefore, if you have a medtech project, you really need to understand how little do you need to document. And the first thing is you have to document safety. But and then you have to understand, is this a class 1, 2, or 3, and how little can I get away with? Because if you have that mindset, you get a product to market faster. And you learn, and maybe you learn you have to document it better. But now you are in the market and you know what arguments you need to document. Now the market is telling you, if you could document this and that, I would buy it. It's not just a Danish nurse telling you. This is distributors in the market, hospitals across Germany, across Europe telling you, this is what you need to document. And that's another mistake you can do if you try to set up a clinical study which end up documenting something the market is not interested in. Then you have spent millions on clinical documentation, but it was the wrong thing we tested. So again, getting to the market early is important, also for your clinical studies. And my point here is really, you need to have someone in your team who understands the commercial side.
Okay. Speaking of the team,
yeah,
how do you build a really good team?
I think it's very important. It's important where you are in the process. But if you're starting with your time perspective, what is the journey we're entering? You can set up a team at the beginning and later. But it's important that you are willing to change your team as you go along. Because if you start up with a lot of engineers at the beginning and doesn't add, you will probably fail, because they will never stop developing. If you start a project without having the needed understanding of the need, the patient need, the hospital need, and the distributor need, you will probably make wrong decisions. So the team will have to have someone who understands the business at an early stage, or you will have to employ or pay for some advisors. But that's important. And then you have, of course, your product development period, you have your CE mark, and you have the commercialization periods later on, and you need different people. So I don't think you can set one team and have the same team from start to end. Yeah. And then I would like to say also that speed.
Okay.
You were also asking about the CEO's abilities. He needs to be able to listen, of course, to the many different views. If you sit in an international company, you have experts on every finger. But in a small company, you're just you. And therefore, you have to be very good at listening to advisors, to the market, whatever, but listen and then have a strong focus on speed. Because if you don't deliver fast, your money will run out. And then something that comes with speed is the burn rate. If you have high speed and only make right decisions, you will probably succeed. If you make too many bad decisions, every bad decision can end up costing you a year. And that's burn rate directly on the money someone gave you. And therefore, the burn rate is also important always to have on mind. And therefore, speed and focus is really important, because you don't have much money. And if you have $1 million or $2 million, you think you have a lot of money, but you don't. You will probably end up spending 20, 30, 40, 50 million before a product is on or successful on the market. Okay,
I have one last question for you today. If you could change one thing about the healthcare innovation ecosystem to make it easier for startups, what would it be?
Yeah, it's maybe not surprising, but I started the company CoopMed because I saw that there is a big need for having a company who's only interested in the commercial side and supporting various startup companies. Because if you start to bundle your startup companies, you can share the cost. If Novo Nordisk or BII or Innovation Foundation would spend some money on a group of people that would not only gather information and be advisors, but actually selling the products of the startups. By having a warehouse in Germany or wherever, having all the logistics in place, knowing the customers, maybe even having other products from other startups going to the same distributors. So this idea of having some volume in terms of several startup companies supporting each other, I think that's a great idea, and I think it's really needed. It surprises me that there's a willingness to spend money on product development and clinical development, but not on the commercial side. Mm-hmm. It goes hand in hand.
Exactly. And this has been a very nice, very good discussion, and thank you so much for taking part in our podcast. That's it for this episode of Walk the Valley. Talking with Finn Ketler gave us a fresh perspective on the strategic challenges that startups face beyond funding. We explored the importance of early customer engagement, team building, and positioning yourself strategically to ensure that a great product actually reaches the market. Finn's insights pointed out the harsh reality: innovation alone isn't enough. Commercialization is what determines success in the end. And while the Valley of Death may have different roadblocks, it's ultimately one challenge that every healthcare startup must navigate. You can listen to the Walk the Valley on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Be sure to subscribe for more stories about the tough but rewarding journey through healthcare innovation. If you enjoyed the episode, leave us a review. It makes a big difference. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep walking the valley.